is the wars that are currently going on around the world, the war obviously in Ukraine and the war in Gaza at the moment as well. What are your perspectives on that? We'll give a quick 1-2 minute breakdown of that, and then we'll get into a slight back and forth. And which candidate do you think is going to be better for world peace if that is your objective? Starting with you, Royce.
In the forever wars. Our country's bankrupt. Close the border, end the wars. Yeah, we can't be an empire. This is how the Roman Empire fell. All of these academic elites and intellectuals know that when a country is defending more military outposts than it can pay the interest on their national debt, they're effectively insolvent, and the military is going to start to feel it next if we haven't already. And if we have, I'm sure out of national security, our Department of Defense wouldn't make that public knowledge. So, yeah, I'm pretty firmly against being involved in wars that we can't win. And that's another fixture of the international rules-based order, that in order to bring peace, we need war. And that's been a mainstay since the end of World War II. You know, have we lost 80 million lives? No. You know, have we lost 80 million lives in 6 years? No. So I guess you could say it's been successful in that sense. But what it's done is caused extreme distrust in the global community, which is why when Bibi Netanyahu stands up at the United Nations, 2/3 of the countries get up and walk out. It's not because they hate Jews or Israel. It's because we said the United States dollar would remain neutral. And Vladimir Putin showed the entire world by going into Ukraine. 48 hours later, Joe Biden says, we're taking them off the SWIFT banking system. You know, it's one of the most brilliant strategic military moves in the history of human civilization. For that reason, the prevailing narrative was the United States dollar was neutral, and Vladimir Putin showed everybody it wasn't. So now we got a couple of fires we got to put out. One, we can't afford the wars. That's number one. Number two, we're in wars that don't serve our national interests whatsoever when you really look at it. Three, we can't win the wars. And number four, there's a growing global narrative that's completely anti-American, some for good reasons, some that have been foisted and you know, brought to life in the universities from here to Beijing.
All right, Mason.
Yeah, I hope Royce would agree with me that both of the candidates currently running for office are seeking to perpetuate the military-industrial complex. I couldn't say that either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump would be necessarily easier on countries like Iran. It seems like we're getting closer and closer to war with Iran, regardless of which candidate is in office. Royce might dispute that claim, but it's just not true looking at both of the records of both presidents. Donald Trump and his administration deployed about 198,000 soldiers. Biden deployed about 160,000 soldiers, which is like 30,000 less. But in my mind, I think that we shouldn't be involved in any of these international conflicts. Royce and I might be in agreement that the U.S. should prioritize our needs over the needs of other countries. Donald Trump had 65 people that died in combat. Biden had about 16 people that died in combat. Drone strikes, Biden has increased about 550 drone strikes. Donald Trump is anywhere from 300, which was his own administration's testaments, to other testaments like if you look up dronewars.github, it's an independent agency that tries to really see amongst a variety of different independent agencies how many drone strikes were conducted. Some of the higher estimates are around 14,000 from Donald Trump. Now, I can't substantiate that those claims are true, but again, that those are some of the projections that are offered. Both of them didn't start any wars. I feel like that's a talking point that's brought up by people who are supporters of Donald Trump, is that there were no new wars that were started. I think it's a semantic argument because Congress has never declared war since 1940 during World War II. Even Vietnam War was not declared by Congress. This was something that was an action of the executive. And so for me, it's a little bit of a semantic game, especially when Donald Trump increased Syrian military strikes. He abandoned the Kurdish people, literally left them to die, who are our military allies helping us defeat ISIS. So for me, it's like I could make criticisms about both administrations. It feels like with Royce shaking his head, he's going to be doing a lot of defense for Donald Trump, which if you do agree that the U.S. should not be involved in military international conflict, I don't know how you could support an administration like that.
Oh, really?
Go ahead.
I mean, of course you would say that. I mean, that's just, you know, I get it. The left is gonna, the left is willing to die on this hill. They're willing to die in the flames of a nuclear fallout there in the heartland in
I
Ukraine.
just said Kamala Harris is inching closer to war with Iran. I'm being objective here, Royce. I'm
No,
not cheerleading. I'm not cheerleading for my candidate like you are.
It's not about Iran. It's actually she's inching us closer to a war with Russia, the one that you failed to mention, the one that actually has the nuclear potential, the overt nuclear potential. Because Russia is a nuclear superpower right now. Iran aspires to be one. We don't even know if they have nukes actually. So
Wait, who is it that supports Iran again? Who is it that's like a international ally of Iran? As someone who's going to be a senator, I'm sure that you know.
Obama.
Obama's an international ally of Iran, not Russia.
Yeah, he's an international ally of Iran for sure.
Yeah, and Russia's not an ally of Iran.
Oh yeah,
Do you know this as a U.S. senator?
Are the Russians in a coordinated alliance with Iran and China? Yes, it would appear so.
Okay, then what are we talking about here, Royce?
I'm not sure how the question's relevant. I think Obama's given just as much aid to the Iranians as
you tried to make the
has.
distinction that Russia's the only one who could have nuclear possibilities. Iran doesn't. If Iran is tied in with Russia and China, obviously a military conflict with Iran would result in those nuclear weapons, or has the potential to result in those.
Oh, you think the Russians would potentially give nuclear weapons to Iran,
or actually conduct a strike on behalf of Iran?
You think the Russian? Well, then you don't know enough about the Chinese people, the Russian people, and the Persian people. I don't think that.
I think you got stumped there, and you're getting a little defensive. But keep going.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sound on my foreign policy, especially when it comes to military conflicts. But we can certainly dive deeper. What I'll say is your claim that the Biden administration didn't start any new wars. Well, the Biden administration, per your own sort of standard, because Donald Trump appointed William Barr. So Barack Obama appointed Joe Biden, and Barack Obama was involved in a new war. And even more importantly, Joe Biden, his time in DC extends all the way back to when we first went into Iraq and Afghanistan, and I believe he was in support of those efforts as well.
He was absolutely 100%.
Okay, so if Kamala Harris is now part of his administration, is he under the same sort of scrutiny or moral ethical standard as William Barr under Trump?
Royce, I think you failed to hear me at the beginning of this when I said that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump don't offer any productive solutions when it comes to de-escalating military.
Oh no, but when you look at the totality,
crazy how I said that.
No, when you look at the totality of the political lineage of Kamala Harris all the way back to George Bush Sr., they've been involved in most of the new wars, not just some of them, but most of them.
And what do you mean? Donald Trump, all of his allies come from, most of Donald Trump's allies when it comes to foreign policy advisors are coming from the Bush administration, which led one of the largest war crimes in American history.
That was a mistake.
Okay, great. Then I don't know what we're arguing about when we both agree that both of these candidates have terrible records when it comes to foreign policy.
Only one of them currently acknowledges those mistakes.
Who? Donald Trump? He said that he made a mistake in his first term, is what you're saying.
Donald Trump knows very well the mistakes he made with trusting the neocon and rhino establishment in the Republican Party. Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay.
Kamala
Harris,
that
you admit his faults. I'm glad that you admit his faults.
Well, I mean, I think he said it already. Yeah, he's made some mistakes in the people he's chosen to be around him, but you can't.
But it's going to be different this time, I trust.
Well, I think we should at least take on face value what they say their priorities are from the outset. Kamala Harris says that we will defend the Ukraine to whatever. In fact, she says we'll defend the Ukraine until we recover every occupied territory there in the region, and that would include the Donbass and Crimea. And Russia says it's a red line, and we're basically baiting the Russians to a nuclear strike. We're saying Putin claims he'll launch nukes, but we don't really believe him. That's what the conventional party line is for the Democrats right now. And Kamala Harris hasn't deviated from that one bit, not even an iota. Okay, she is fully committed to the escalation of conflict with Russia, as too is the entire Democrat Party. Donald Trump's the only one who said we're going to make peace. In fact, I haven't heard anybody in the entire Democrat Party talk about peace when it comes to the Ukraine and Russia conflict. I haven't really even heard them talk about peace when it comes to the Middle East region. I mean, I've heard them talk about peace or ceasefire in Gaza, but I haven't really heard them talk about peace in the entirety of the region. And see, there's where you can see the real fangs of the uniparty. What I'm saying is that when Donald Trump threatened to pull out of NATO, that was the most significant thing a United States president has said regarding foreign policy and our military footprint and spending since the days of JFK. By far, not even close.
I think it was even more influential when he said that President Xi is a noteworthy leader because he instills fear in his people and people respect him.
No, he isn't.
Interesting.
See, what do you mean that? Why do you not think do you challenge that?
I don't think that he's somebody that a U.S. president should aspire to be. Which Donald Trump is saying
now you're conflating two things.
No, Donald Trump said that he wants our people to treat the president like they do in China, which is just antithetical to any democratic regime.
You just conflated two things. You just tried to make it
I'm
seem
mentioning two things that he said.
No, you said that noteworthy is the same as aspiring to be like somebody. That's not true at all.
He said that he wants the people of the United States
not the
to
quote
treat
you
him
referenced.
with the same respect that he
not
does.
The quote you referenced.
Yeah, it's like people can say two different quotes. Isn't this crazy, Royce?
He is noteworthy.
Isn't it crazy people can say multiple things?
I'm asking you about the first quote. He is noteworthy. Yes, he is. First of all, he's the leader. Of the third or second biggest superpower in the entire world. So by that standard alone, he's a noteworthy leader.
You wouldn't say Biden's a noteworthy leader, but continue.
No, I would not say Joe Biden's a noteworthy leader.
He's the largest military leader in the entire world. What do you mean? I just use your own standard.
No. The standard is not solely that. You couldn't measure it that way. But what also is true about President Xi is he can stand up and talk in front of his people for an hour straight and not lose his train of thought. Joe Biden can't. And Kamala Harris and all the rest of the Democrats perpetuated a lie that Joe Biden was mentally fit, and he certainly isn't. And everybody saw it, and they all pretended like they didn't, which is the biggest indictment of anything in this entire campaign season. Joe Biden's mental capacity.
As well. To pretend like Donald Trump is mentally there is just wild to me.
I know you would say that. The point is,
what do you mean?
President Xi is a noteworthy leader. Okay, he's been a very successful leader by means that we wouldn't agree with here in America, but as our national mortal enemy and adversary, we do have to acknowledge who he is and who he has been and who he can be going forward if we're in a competition with him. That's prudent leadership. I admire Donald Trump for saying, hey, don't get so caught up in hating your enemies that you fail to acknowledge what the real threat that they pose and how competent they are at leading.
Again, this is a pivot away from my main criticism, which is saying that the American people should be respectful of the president in the same way.
No, what he was saying is, okay, well, I'll answer the question for myself as United States Senator. If I was to say that, which I didn't say that, and I'm not so sure that you're not taking it out of context because you seem to not know very basic things like Kamala Harris said the machines weren't safe, so it's hard for me to take you on face value here. But if I do, for argument's sake, if I was to say that the American people should be more or be better suited towards their leadership like they are in China, the easy argument there is that China has a very national culture and has a very ethno-national culture. In America, Americans have been brainwashed by their academic elites in mainstream media outlets to think that American citizenship, that national pride, is a relic of racism. So I actually agree with them on that front as well. I'm glad you pointed it out. I need to call Donald Trump up and say, hey, man, we got some newfound common ground here. I like that you said this, because what he's saying is if you're in a war with another country, then your politicians and leaders are in a conflict, in a competition, but also the spirit of your people. This is something Americans used to understand when we had American civics in the schools. There's a morale in the populace. And we've lost that because for some reason, our leaders and academic elites are very anti-American in their spirit. So what's actually very very true in what he's saying there is that the Chinese people, in large part, not all, obviously the Uyghurs there in East Turkestan, who none of the Democrats ever want to mention, but a lot of the Chinese people there in mainland China do have an affection for the CCP and their leadership and the ideas of communism, and they're willing to fight and they're willing to live and die for those ideas. We're losing that here in America. So in that sense, we do want to try and be more like the Chinese, not for the same reasons or the same values, but at least in the outcome and in the result. Can you agree with that? Or you think we shouldn't have it? We shouldn't. You just said you believe in us, giving more or prioritizing our nation. We're losing that battle with China and Russia. Their people prioritize the nation. So we should, even you're saying we should be more national oriented.
I don't think that the leader of a nation should impose fear in order to get the respect of people. That's what I'm.
Do you think President Xi does that?
Trump said. Absolutely. And I think that you would be mistaken if you don't agree that an authoritarian regime that not only spies on its own people, but has the largest surveillance state in the entire world. These are not things that we should appreciate.
Oh, I'm the biggest China hawk you'll find. So why is it that all the Democrats are okay with China becoming the center of the future global economy?
See how you can't stick to an issue because
No,
you were just
that is
such
the
big on
issue.
President Xi, and now you're not on President Xi.
No, no, no.
Which
I'm
one
not
is it
big
that
on
you want to talk
President
about?
Xi. I'm a China hawk. Let me be clear with you, sir. You're not tracking the conversation well.
I am
Because you
tracking the
guys talking these
conversation.
silos. You guys talking these silos with these one hit, with these like, hits you do, like these one-line hits for some, I don't know, 15-second piece of content that Kamala Harris is going to spread through the Democrat chat groups. Let
You
me
think
help you,
Kamala
sir.
Harris is going to spread my stuff? Interesting.
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe I think she watches Rattlesnake TV, boys. So.
Hey, listen.
She's a super chatter. She's the next one that comes up.
I'm not saying that I like President Xi. I'm saying that I understand his position and I have to acknowledge his success. What I'm saying is, why is it that the Democrat? I was one of the first people to publicly talk about the Uyghurs on national television, and the entire mainstream media that is liberal leaning, you have to admit that, they completely ignored it. They didn't even want to talk about it. In fact, some of them said it was a conspiracy theory. Although the United Nations has ruled it a humanitarian crisis. You see how the humanitarian crisis designation even is sort of a la carte and selective? When the illegal immigrants or the Chinese nationals are coming across our southern border, that's a humanitarian crisis. But when President Xi puts 2 million Uyghurs, ethnic minorities, Muslims in concentration camps, that's not a humanitarian crisis for some liberals. And if we agree that it is a humanitarian crisis, if we agree that President Xi is an authoritarian and totalitarian dictator who we should impugn, why is it that the entire Democrat Party and their liberal intellectual globalist thought leaders and academics have completely conceded that the future of the global economy is there in Beijing? Why didn't Kamala Harris stand up as the vice president or in the Senate and say, I'm bringing a bill forward to suggest that the tariff should go to 200%, and the manufacturing here in America should go from 0 to 1,000 to ensure that we're not entangled morally and ethically with a nation that we fundamentally oppose.
Does China pay these tariffs? Real quick, Royce.
First, you didn't answer my question. I'll answer that. But first, what Democrat has really stood up and firmly opposed China?
I'm not somebody who respects the Democrats on their foreign policy takes. I mentioned this at the very beginning of this conversation.
Do you not think foreign policy is high? Do you not think foreign policy is high up enough on the chart of American political culture to be a determining factor of how you vote?
I think that foreign policy, regardless of what administration goes in, is there to perpetuate the military-industrial complex. You're going to hear
But we're not talking about the military
again.
now. We're talking about the moral hazard of being intertwined with a nation.
Why do you think that you'd be against other nations is to increase our military stance and our military presence against those nations?
What I'm asking you
That's
is,
the whole point.
do you think that we should have a China-dominated supply chain? And what Democrats have fundamentally opposed?
I think that the United States should have manufacturing here, which is why we should have legislation like the Chips and Science Act to ensure that we're getting away from China dominance. If you don't want Chinese dominance, we should have things like initiatives to install green renewable energies, because by definition, non-renewable energy programs are by definition non-renewable. So if we run out of them eventually, which country do you want to be the innovators of this technology? Personally, I want the United States. I think not only are we the strongest innovator in the world, I think we could get rich selling this technology to other nations who need this in order to uphold their energy grids.
Right.
And if you want China to be the people to do that, you're unpatriotic, Bryce. That's it at the end of the day.
Do most of the components for the solar and renewable energy sources come from China, manufactured in China right now?
It does, and that's why we should have more manufacturing in the United States, which is, like I said earlier, something like the Chips and Science Act, which is investing. Stood up and said what?
Which Democrat has stood up and said that American manufacturing should take precedence over all the other cultural one-issue topics that the Democrat platform stands on?